"Ma'am, step away from that porch unless you want this day to get a whole lot worse." The command cracked through the quiet afternoon with enough force to make every conversation on the block dissolve into uneasy silence. Angela Brooks stopped halfway up the 3 wooden steps leading to her small brick home, her fingers still wrapped around the paper grocery bag resting against her hip. For a brief second, she wondered if the officer was talking to someone behind her. Then she saw his eyes locked squarely on hers. The blue and red patrol lights reflected across the polished windows of the neighboring houses, washing the familiar street in flashes that felt strangely out of place beneath the warm North Carolina sun. This was Maple Street, the neighborhood where Angela had spent nearly 12 years building a peaceful life. Children learned to ride bicycles on this sidewalk. Elderly couples waved from shaded porches every evening. She knew which maple tree turned red first every fall and which mailbox the neighborhood robins always chose for their nests. Nothing about this place had ever felt unfamiliar until this moment. Officer Daniel Mercer stood beside his patrol SUV with one hand resting near his duty belt, his posture rigid with absolute confidence. His crisp uniform looked untouched by the summer heat, and his expression carried the certainty of a man who expected immediate obedience without explanation. "Hands where I can see them," he said again, his voice steady but loud enough for nearby windows to slide open one after another. Angela slowly raised one hand, while keeping the grocery bag balanced in the other. Inside were fresh vegetables, soup, and a loaf of wheat bread she had picked up after finishing another 12-hour nursing shift at Memorial Regional Hospital. Her tired shoulders ached beneath the weight of exhaustion more than the weight of the groceries, yet she kept her voice calm. "Officer, this is my house." Mercer glanced briefly toward the front door before looking back at her with visible skepticism. "We'll decide that after I ask a few questions." The words floated over the quiet lawns like a cold breeze. Across the street, curtains shifted. A teenager paused while shooting basketball in a driveway. An elderly man watering flowers slowly lowered the hose without taking his eyes off the scene unfolding only 50 feet away. Angela felt every glance without looking at anyone except the officer standing before her. She had cared for trauma patients, comforted grieving families, and worked through nights that stretched endlessly beneath fluorescent hospital lights. Remaining composed had become part of who she was. Still, something about being questioned on the front steps of her own home tightened her chest in a way she could not explain. A soft metallic jingle drifted from somewhere farther down the block. Barely noticeable, just the gentle sound of a dog collar catching the afternoon breeze. No one paid attention to it. Halfway down the sidewalk, a man wearing a faded gray hoodie continued walking at an unhurried pace with a Belgian Malinois beside him. The dog moved with remarkable discipline, never pulling against the leash, never wandering toward the commotion. The pair looked like any neighbor enjoying a quiet afternoon walk. The man never interrupted. He never called out. He simply slowed his pace for the briefest moment, his calm eyes sweeping across the patrol vehicle, the officer, and the woman standing on her own front porch before continuing forward as though he had all the time in the world. Angela lowered the grocery bag onto the top step with deliberate care, making sure the carton of eggs inside would not crack against the cans of soup. Her hospital identification badge still hung from the pocket of her navy blue scrub jacket, catching the sunlight every time the breeze shifted the fabric. 12 hours earlier, she had been adjusting blankets for an elderly patient recovering from heart surgery. 2 hours before that, she had comforted a frightened little boy waiting for stitches while promising him that brave did not mean never being scared. Those quiet moments always reminded her why she had chosen nursing. Caring for people had never been about recognition. It was simply the way she believed the world became a little better. She looked back toward Officer Mercer with the same steady expression she used inside crowded emergency rooms when emotions threatened to overwhelm everyone in sight. "My identification is in my purse," she said softly. "It is inside the grocery bag. I can reach for it slowly if that is all right with you." Mercer did not answer immediately. Instead, he studied her face as though searching for something that did not match the peaceful woman standing before him. "Stay exactly where you are," he replied after several long seconds. "There was a report about a suspicious person in this area." Angela glanced quietly down the street lined with familiar homes whose porch lights she had seen glowing after countless overnight shifts. She knew nearly every family on Maple Street by name. Mrs. Evelyn Parker across the road always baked peach cobbler every Sunday afternoon. The Ramirez twins cut lawns every summer to save money for college. Mr. Howard Lewis, the retired mail carrier, still waved at every passing car because, as he liked to joke, old habits never retired. Angela had checked on him during flu season more than once, bringing homemade chicken soup when he was too weak to leave the house. This neighborhood was more than an address. It was home in every possible sense. One front door slowly opened farther. Mrs. Parker stepped onto her porch, concern filling her gentle face. She looked from Angela to the patrol vehicle before folding her hands tightly together. She wanted to speak, but uncertainty kept her silent. The afternoon air suddenly felt heavier than the summer humidity settling over the sidewalks. Down the block, the man walking the Belgian Malinois paused beside a large oak tree. He bent slightly to adjust the dog's collar as though nothing unusual had happened. The animal remained perfectly composed, ears alert, quietly observing the distant conversation without making a sound. The man rested one calm hand against the leash before glancing toward the street signs, the parked vehicles, and finally back toward Angela's house. His movements carried an almost effortless patience that blended into the neighborhood, so naturally no one paid him much attention. Angela noticed him only for an instant before returning her focus to Mercer. She had learned years ago that calm could be contagious if someone chose to protect it. Raising her voice would only feed the growing tension spreading across the block. "Officer," she said carefully, "I understand you have a job to do. I only ask that you listen to what I am saying. I have lived here for more than a decade. My driver's license and my house keys will both confirm that." Mercer shifted his weight slightly, his expression unchanged, but somewhere behind the stillness of the neighborhood another invisible current had begun to move, one that none of the watching neighbors could yet recognize. Officer Mercer finally nodded once, but the gesture carried no warmth. "Slowly," he said. Angela carefully bent toward the grocery bag, every movement measured, every breath controlled. She lifted her leather purse with one hand and removed her wallet without making any sudden motion. The afternoon sun reflected softly off her driver's license as she held it where he could clearly see it. Mercer stepped forward, took the card, and examined it in silence. The address matched the house directly behind Angela. The photograph matched the woman standing calmly before him. Even the issue date showed she had lived there for years. For a moment it seemed the encounter might quietly end. Instead, Mercer looked past the identification toward the front porch, then back to Angela. "Anyone else inside?" he asked. "My mother is resting," Angela answered honestly. "She is recovering from knee replacement surgery. I take care of her when I am not at the hospital." Mercer glanced toward the front windows where lace curtains moved slightly beneath the steady hum of the air conditioner. His expression remained unreadable. "I will need to verify that." Angela blinked once, surprised less by the request than by the certainty in his voice. "Officer, with respect, I have already shown you my identification. Is there a reason you believe a crime has taken place?" The question hung in the warm afternoon air. Mercer folded his arms. "People ask questions when they think they know the law." His words were not loud, but they carried across the quiet street. Several neighbors exchanged uneasy glances. Mrs. Parker shifted another step onto her porch. Mr. Lewis quietly turned off the garden hose, the sudden absence of running water making the neighborhood feel almost unnaturally still. Angela resisted the temptation to defend herself further. Years in emergency medicine had taught her that emotions could either calm a situation or quietly feed it. She chose patience again. "I only want to understand why I am being stopped outside my own home," she replied. Mercer looked toward the patrol vehicle, then activated the shoulder microphone clipped to his uniform. His brief radio transmission was too quiet for anyone else to understand, but the sound itself changed the atmosphere. It suggested that the encounter was becoming something larger than a simple misunderstanding. Down the block, the man in the gray hoodie had reached the corner where an old maple tree cast a broad shadow across the sidewalk. He stopped beside a weathered wooden bench while the Belgian Malinois sat neatly at his left side without needing a command. The dog's amber eyes never wandered. They remained fixed in the direction of Angela's front yard with calm, disciplined focus. The man rested one hand lightly against the dog's shoulder, observing without urgency. Nothing about his posture invited attention. He looked like another resident enjoying a peaceful afternoon walk, yet his eyes quietly absorbed every detail. The distance between him and the patrol vehicle measured nearly half a football field, but years of disciplined observation had taught him that important moments rarely announce themselves loudly. Back on the porch, Angela noticed another familiar face. 12-year-old Noah Ramirez stood beside his family's mailbox, clutching a basketball beneath one arm. He looked confused more than frightened. She remembered helping him with homework during the previous school year while his parents worked late shifts. Seeing the uncertainty on his young face strengthened her resolve to remain composed. Children remembered moments like these for years. Whatever happened next, she refused to become another reason a child learned to fear instead of trust. Mercer handed her identification back, but made no move toward leaving. Instead, he looked directly into Angela's eyes and said quietly, "This conversation is not finished yet." Angela held his gaze without raising her voice. The silence between them stretched long enough for the distant sound of a lawn mower to fade several streets away, leaving only birdsong and the gentle rustling of maple leaves overhead. She could feel dozens of unseen eyes following every word from behind curtains and half-open front doors. "Officer," she said carefully, "if there is a specific concern, I am willing to cooperate. But I also have the right to understand why I am being questioned outside my own home after presenting valid identification." Mercer looked toward the house once more before returning his attention to her. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You seem very confident," he replied. "Confidence is not the same thing as refusing to cooperate." Angela answered with the same calm tone she used when reassuring anxious patients before difficult procedures. "I respect your job. I simply believe respect should go both ways." The words landed softly, but they carried farther than either of them expected. Mrs. Parker quietly nodded to herself across the street. Mr. Lewis folded his weathered hands over the handle of his garden hose. Even young Noah Ramirez stood perfectly still, the basketball tucked beneath his arm as though he had forgotten it was there. Mercer glanced around the neighborhood and seemed to notice for the first time that more people had gathered than he realized. Every porch now held at least one quiet observer. No one interrupted. No one shouted. They simply watched. That silent audience seemed to sharpen the tension in the warm afternoon air. "Place your grocery bag on the porch and step down here," Mercer instructed. Angela had already placed the bag beside the front door several minutes earlier, but she slowly descended the 3 wooden steps anyway, stopping a respectful distance away. The sunlight reflected off the silver key resting between her fingers. "These are my house keys," she said. "If you would like, I can unlock the front door so you can see that this is my residence." Mercer shook his head. "Not yet." Angela lowered her hand again. She noticed the breeze carrying the scent of freshly cut grass from somewhere farther down the block. Ordinary sounds continued around them. A wind chime rang softly. A sprinkler clicked rhythmically across a nearby lawn. Yet everything somehow felt suspended, as though the neighborhood itself had stopped breathing. At the far corner, the man in the gray hoodie remained beside the weathered bench. The Belgian Malinois continued sitting perfectly still, its ears forward, its posture relaxed but attentive. The man glanced briefly toward his wristwatch before returning his attention to the unfolding conversation. His expression never changed. Years spent making decisions under extraordinary pressure had taught him that patience often revealed far more than urgency ever could. Angela noticed that the dog had not barked once. Somehow that quiet discipline made the animal even more memorable. Mercer shifted one step closer, lowering his voice enough that only Angela could clearly hear him. "Sometimes people do not belong where they claim they belong." Angela absorbed the remark without reacting. Instead, she answered after a slow breath. "Officer, belonging is not something another person gets to decide for me. I worked hard for this house. I cared for my father here until the day we lost him. My mother sleeps inside because she trusts this neighborhood to be safe. This address is part of my life, not just a line on my driver's license." For the first time since the encounter began, Mercer did not answer immediately. Instead, he stared at Angela in complete silence while somewhere behind him the faint metallic jingle of the Belgian Malinois' collar echoed once more through the quiet afternoon. The quiet lasted only a heartbeat before the crackle of Mercer's shoulder radio broke it apart again. A calm dispatcher acknowledged his earlier transmission, then the line went silent. Mercer pressed the button once more without taking his eyes off Angela. "Remain where you are until another unit arrives," he said. The statement drew a ripple of concern across the watching neighbors. Angela slowly exhaled. She had planned to carry groceries inside, check on her mother, and finally rest after a long night at the hospital. Instead, every passing minute stretched the uncertainty further across the street she loved. She folded her hands loosely in front of her, making certain every movement remained visible. "Officer," she said with quiet sincerity, "my mother will become worried if I do not come inside soon. She cannot easily walk to the window after her surgery. She may think something is wrong." Mercer answered without hesitation. "She can wait." The words settled heavily over the front yard. Mrs. Parker finally took one cautious step toward the sidewalk before stopping herself. Mr. Lewis looked toward the other neighbors, silently searching their faces for someone willing to speak first. Nobody wanted to make the situation worse, yet nobody believed what they were witnessing belonged on their peaceful block either. Angela noticed Noah Ramirez still standing beside his mailbox. His eyes shifted from the patrol vehicle to her face, trying to understand why the woman who had once helped him study for science tests was being treated like a stranger. She offered him the smallest reassuring smile she could manage. It was not for herself. It was for him. Children deserved at least one calm face in confusing moments. Down the street, the man in the gray hoodie gently rested 2 fingers against the Belgian Malinois collar. The dog remained seated with remarkable composure, breathing slowly, watching every movement without a single sound. The man lifted his eyes toward the patrol vehicle, then quietly scanned the surrounding homes, the sidewalks, the open driveways, and every witness now standing outside. His attention lingered for a brief moment on the street name posted beneath the stop sign before returning to Angela's yard. He still said nothing. His silence seemed almost intentional, as though he were allowing the moment to reveal itself completely before taking even a single step. A warm gust of wind swept across Maple Street, carrying the scent of fresh pine mulch from a nearby flower bed. One of Angela's grocery bags tipped gently onto its side. An apple rolled across the porch and came to rest beside a rocking chair her late father had built by hand years before. She looked at it for only a second before lifting her eyes again. "Officer Mercer," she said evenly, reading the name stitched above his uniform pocket for the first time. "I believe every person deserves dignity, including those who wear a badge. I have treated police officers in the emergency room before. I have also treated teachers, mechanics, veterans, and people without homes. I never decided who deserved compassion based on appearance. I hope you can understand why I am asking for that same respect today." Mercer stared at her without responding. Something in her words seemed to meet unexpected resistance inside him, yet his expression remained firm. Across the street, another front door opened. Then another. Quietly, without speaking, more neighbors stepped onto their porches. No chants, no accusations. Only ordinary people standing in the afternoon sunlight, watching carefully, remembering every word. At the corner beneath the broad shade of the maple tree, the man beside the Belgian Malinois finally shifted his weight forward. It was only one measured step, but the dog's ears lifted instantly, and for the first time since the encounter began, it became clear that neither of them had been passing through the neighborhood by chance. The neighborhood seemed to settle into a strange stillness, as though time itself had decided to wait before revealing what came next. A pair of mourning doves landed on the telephone wire above Maple Street, their soft calls drifting through the warm afternoon air, while long shadows stretched a little farther across the neatly trimmed lawns. Angela could hear her own breathing again, steady and measured, the same rhythm she had relied upon through countless overnight hospital shifts when families searched her face for hope before hearing difficult news. She refused to let frustration replace compassion. Somewhere behind the front door, her mother was probably sitting in the living room, wondering why the groceries had not yet come inside. That thought touched Angela's heart more deeply than the questions being asked outside. She imagined the familiar scent of lavender from the hallway, the old family photographs lining the staircase, and the rocking chair where her father had spent every autumn evening watching neighbors stroll past. Those memories reminded her exactly why she had worked so hard to build a peaceful life in this house. Across the street, Mrs. Parker quietly bent to pick a small yellow flower growing beside her walkway, absent-mindedly rolling the stem between her fingers as she watched. Mr. Lewis removed his cap and held it against his chest, his weathered face carrying the silent concern of someone who had lived long enough to recognize that ordinary afternoons sometimes became unforgettable. Even young Noah remained rooted beside the mailbox, no longer thinking about basketball, simply trying to understand why kindness could sometimes be mistaken for suspicion. The breeze returned, lifting a few loose leaves that danced slowly across the pavement before coming to rest near the curb. Down beneath the broad maple tree, the Belgian Malinois remained perfectly composed. Its breathing was calm, its posture relaxed, yet every sense appeared quietly engaged. The man holding the leash watched without impatience. His eyes moved from Angela to Mercer, then briefly toward the surrounding homes, carefully noticing each witness who had stepped outside. Years of disciplined observation had taught him that truth often revealed itself in silence more clearly than in arguments. He reached into the pocket of his gray hoodie and briefly touched a small object before letting his hand rest there again. Nothing about the motion attracted attention. It looked as natural as someone checking for house keys before continuing a walk. Angela looked once more toward Officer Mercer. The sunlight reflected faintly across the polished badge on his uniform, while the gentle wind stirred the edges of the American flag mounted on a nearby porch. She spoke quietly enough that only he could clearly hear. I hope when today is over, every child watching from these homes remembers that calm is stronger than fear. Mercer did not answer. Instead, his eyes shifted for the first time beyond Angela's shoulder, scanning the gathering neighbors who had remained respectful despite the growing tension. He appeared to realize that this was no longer a private conversation between two people. It had become something the entire street would remember. At the corner, the man finally withdrew his hand from his pocket. A small black device rested loosely in his palm, its tiny indicator light glowing a steady green. Without changing his expression, he pressed a single button, slipped the device back into his pocket, and began walking toward Angela's house with the Belgian Malinois moving silently beside him, each measured step carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had already decided exactly what needed to happen next. The sound of steady footsteps across the sidewalk finally drew every eye on Maple Street. The man in the gray hoodie approached without haste, the Belgian Malinois matching his pace so precisely that its paws seemed to fall in perfect rhythm with his own. Angela watched him with quiet curiosity, recognizing neither his face nor the calm confidence that surrounded him. Mercer turned slightly as the pair stopped several feet away. "This is an active police matter," Mercer said firmly. "Please keep your distance." The stranger nodded politely, his expression composed. "I intend to," he answered. His voice carried neither challenge nor hesitation. It was the measured tone of someone accustomed to remaining calm while everyone else hurried. The Belgian Malinois sat immediately at his side without being asked, its eyes alert but peaceful, never making a sound. The neighbors exchanged puzzled glances. Until that moment, most of them had assumed he was simply another resident passing through the neighborhood. The man looked toward Angela first. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked. She offered a small nod. "I am. Thank you." Only then did he turn back to Mercer. "Officer, my name is Ethan Walker. I live 2 blocks over. I have been walking my dog for the last several minutes, and I have observed this entire interaction from the moment your patrol vehicle arrived." Mercer folded his arms. "If you have concerns, you can contact the department later." Ethan acknowledged the response with another slight nod. "That is certainly an option." He reached calmly into the pocket of his hoodie and removed a small identification wallet. Opening it slowly, he held it where Mercer could clearly read it without stepping closer. "I am a retired Navy SEAL," he said evenly. "I now volunteer as a trainer for service and working dogs, including retired military canines. Rex here served overseas before joining my family." Several neighbors quietly inhaled in surprise. Even Noah's eyes widened as he looked from the disciplined dog to the calm man holding its leash. Mercer studied the identification for a long moment before Ethan returned it to his pocket. There was no boastfulness in the introduction, only simple facts delivered with quiet confidence. Ethan continued, "During my years of service, one lesson mattered above all others. Observation before judgment. That habit never leaves you. He gently touched the small black device clipped beneath the edge of his hoodie. This personal camera has been recording continuously throughout my walk. It captured the entire encounter from the moment I noticed the patrol vehicle. Timestamps, audio, and video. Mercer glanced briefly toward the device before looking back at Ethan. The confidence that had marked his posture since arriving on Maple Street seemed to soften almost imperceptibly. Ethan did not raise his voice. I am not here to interfere with your responsibilities. I am here because accurate records protect everyone, including good officers who perform their duties fairly. Angela remained silent, watching the exchange unfold with the same composure she had maintained all afternoon. Around them, more neighbors quietly lifted their phones, not shouting or accusing anyone, simply preserving what they were witnessing. The afternoon sunlight reflected from porch windows, bicycles, parked cars, and polished badges alike, illuminating the street with an almost unexpected clarity. Rex remained perfectly still beside Ethan, calm eyes moving briefly from Mercer to Angela before settling forward once again. In that quiet moment, the balance of the conversation shifted without a single raised voice, because everyone present suddenly understood that the story of this afternoon no longer depended upon one person's account alone. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Even the breeze seemed quieter as Officer Mercer looked from Ethan's calm expression to the small camera clipped beneath his hoodie, then toward the growing circle of neighbors who had silently witnessed the afternoon unfold. The confidence that had carried him through the encounter no longer seemed quite as certain. A second patrol vehicle slowly turned onto Maple Street and rolled to a gentle stop several houses away. Another officer stepped out, taking in the unusual sight of nearly every resident standing peacefully outside. Before anyone else could speak, Ethan addressed the arriving officer with the same composed professionalism. Good afternoon. My name is Ethan Walker. I have a continuous video recording of today's interaction from beginning to end, along with clear audio and timestamps. I am happy to provide a copy through the proper channels if it assists with an accurate report. The second officer nodded respectfully. Thank you, sir. We appreciate that. Mercer remained silent. Angela watched both officers carefully, her shoulders finally relaxing just enough for the tension to leave her face. She had not asked anyone to rescue her. She had only hoped to be treated with fairness. Mrs. Parker slowly crossed the street carrying the small yellow flower she had picked moments earlier. She stopped beside Angela and gently placed the flower into her hand, without saying a word. It was such a simple gesture that several neighbors quietly smiled. One by one, others stepped a little closer, not surrounding anyone, not creating conflict, simply standing beside the woman they had known for years. Mr. Lewis cleared his throat softly. Officer, he said respectfully, Angela has checked on my family more times than I can count. She belongs here. We all know that. Another neighbor nodded. She helped my daughter after her bicycle accident. She brought groceries when my husband was sick. She watched our children during the snowstorm 2 winters ago. The voices remained calm, each speaking only long enough to share one honest memory before falling silent again. None of them attacked Mercer. None of them demanded punishment. They simply described the neighbor they knew. Ethan looked toward Angela with quiet respect. Character leaves a trail, he said. Sometimes the strongest evidence is the way an entire community speaks about one person. Angela lowered her eyes for a moment before answering. I never wanted anyone embarrassed today. She looked directly at Mercer. I only wanted to go home. The simplicity of those words settled heavily across the street. Mercer glanced toward the familiar houses, the watching neighbors, the second officer, and finally back to Angela. Whatever assumptions had shaped the beginning of the afternoon now stood beside undeniable facts, patient witnesses, and a complete recording. The second officer quietly suggested that everyone allow the matter to be documented properly so the facts could speak for themselves. Ethan immediately agreed and offered to provide his recording without editing or commentary. Angela nodded as well. That is all I have wanted from the beginning, she said. For the facts to matter. Rex remained seated beside Ethan, perfectly calm despite the changing emotions around him. Noah Ramirez finally bounced his basketball once, the hollow echo rolling gently across the pavement before he caught it again. Somehow that ordinary sound reminded everyone that Maple Street had always been a place where children played, neighbors looked after one another, and peaceful afternoons were supposed to end with front porch conversations instead of uncertainty. As the sunlight softened into the warm glow of early evening, the entire neighborhood seemed to breathe again, not because every answer had already arrived, but because truth no longer stood alone. Several weeks later, Maple Street looked exactly as it always had, and yet something invisible had changed. The late afternoon sun poured warm golden light across the familiar brick homes, while children chased one another beneath the same maple trees that had quietly witnessed everything. The sidewalks echoed once again with bicycle tires, friendly greetings, and the peaceful rhythm of ordinary life returning to its rightful place. Angela stepped onto her front porch, carrying 2 cups of tea. Her mother smiled from the rocking chair beside the front window, her recovery progressing a little more each day. The groceries from that unforgettable afternoon had long since been replaced, but the lesson had remained. Truth did not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrived through patient witnesses, honest records, and neighbors willing to stand together without hatred. Across the street, Mrs. Parker trimmed fresh flowers while Mr. Lewis laughed with Noah Ramirez, who proudly bounced his basketball before racing toward the park with friends. Whenever Noah passed Angela's house, he still waved enthusiastically, and she always waved back. The memory he carried was no longer one of confusion. Instead, he remembered that courage could look remarkably calm. Ethan Walker continued his afternoon walks almost every day. Rex remained faithfully at his side, moving with the quiet confidence earned through years of service. As they approached Angela's porch, Ethan tipped his head in greeting. "Good afternoon," he said. "Beautiful day." Angela smiled warmly. "It really is." Nothing more needed to be said. Respect had already spoken louder than conversation ever could. Rex paused for a brief moment, his tail giving a slow, gentle wag before continuing down the sidewalk beside Ethan. Angela watched them disappear beneath the shade of the maple trees until they became part of the peaceful neighborhood once again. She thought about the hospital, where another night shift would begin in only a few hours. New patients would arrive carrying fears nobody else could see. Families would need reassurance. Someone would need a calm voice in the middle of uncertainty. That work mattered now just as much as it always had. Compassion had never depended on whether kindness was returned. It depended on choosing it anyway. Inside the house, a framed photograph rested on the hallway table beside her father's old pocket watch. He had once told her that character was what remained after every misunderstanding finally faded away. At the time, she had been too young to understand those words completely. Now they felt as steady as the foundation beneath the family home he had worked so hard to build. A gentle breeze lifted the American flag hanging from the front porch, its fabric moving softly against the evening sky. Across the street, porch lights flickered on one by one as daylight slowly surrendered to dusk. Maple Street looked ordinary again, and perhaps that was the greatest victory of all. Peace had returned not because difficult moments never happened, but because truth, dignity, and quiet courage had been given room to stand together. Angela picked up the small yellow flower Mrs. Parker had placed in her hand that afternoon. She had pressed it carefully between the pages of an old family Bible, preserving it not as a reminder of hardship, but as a reminder of unexpected goodness. Some people carried badges. Some carried cameras. Some carried difficult memories. She carried hope. As the evening settled gently over the neighborhood, the only sounds left were distant laughter, rustling leaves, and the steady footsteps of neighbors walking home. No speeches followed. No celebration was needed. Justice had not arrived through anger. It had arrived through truth. And in the quiet that followed, Maple Street simply breathed again.